Hello everybody. Hello from the center of Berlin to the first presentation of this year, 2026. What I will present in a few minutes builds on a podcast I recorded with my colleague Philipp Sandmann and on a newsletter by ESI with the topic The US, an identitarian superpower. I will discuss what that means, I will discuss the implications, which are shocking and dark, and I will also discuss why we no longer need to put a question mark behind that assessment. What has been happening in the last few days, the last days of 2025 and the first days of this new year, in that building behind me, the White House, and in other buildings in Washington, should have woken up, will hopefully wake up everyone to what is a dramatic development on the other side of the Atlantic. On the 31st of December 2025, a message was sent out by one of the most important agencies, the Department of Homeland Security in the US government, with a simple promise: America after 100 million deportations. Now, what that means, I will get to in a moment. It came only 3 days after another email, another X message was sent on the platform X by its owner, Elon Musk. He reposted a message again to hundreds of millions of people. He reposted a message adding just one word: wow. The message, and I will read it up, you see it behind me, concerned the percentage of white populations in Western countries since the 1970s. I will not go through all the numbers, but what they show is that there has been a drop in the white population in the US of 24%, in Canada of 25%, in the UK of 15%, and in Western Europe of 16% as a share of the total population. And the tweet that Elon Musk retweeted ended with the sentence, "Insane replaced by the third world. It is all by design." Now, this is not a new message from Elon Musk. He's been worrying daily for the last few weeks, months, about the white population in the world as a rapidly diminishing minority. And he's been arguing on his platform and retweeted others who talked about the response, the necessary response to carry out a policy of remigration, a concept that the far-right extremist identitarian movement has developed in France in the last 15 years and that has been picked up by the far-right across Europe. Now, what you see here is the kind of messages that have been flooding X, the platform of Elon Musk. Messages like this: the enemy of the world is Islam. A picture of young Muslim women in Britain with the message, "This is conquered. It's over for the UK." Or this politician that was retweeted with the message, "Muslims, or rather Mohammedans, as she is derogatorily calling them, are raping our children in the name of their God. Kick them out before Europe dies." Now, Elon Musk also retweeted this, a message by one of the spokespeople of the identitarian movement in Europe, the Austrian Martin Sellner, who said that the South African scenario of a black majority taking back control is our future if we don't start remigration. And Elon Musk retweeted it with the message, "This is what will happen in America." So what will happen to America is you need to remigrate the non-white population so that you, the white population, remains in control. The background to this, let me just give you some facts, is a debate that has been ongoing for decades in the United States about changing demography. The dominant group in the country, white and Christian, by 2016 was a minority group in the United States, 43%. And if you were conservative Christian, supremacist or white nationalist, then this development that white and Christian became a minority was deeply disturbing. In fact, from 2010 to 2020, the number of the religiously unaffiliated, those who did not say in the census that they considered themselves Christians, increased from 59 to 114 million people in the United States. So the biggest growing group was those who did not declare a religion. As Ezra Klein, a famous writer associated with the New York Times, wrote in a book in 2020, 7 out of every 10 seniors in America, older people in America, 7 out of 10 were white and Christian, but fewer than 3 out of 10 of the young adults. So yes, America is changing. And as Ezra Klein also pointed out in this wonderful book, very thought-provoking, Why We Are Polarized, published in 2020, 5 years ago, as long as the country feels threatened by the changes in its makeup, its demography, there will be a market for politicians like Trump. Let's look at the facts before we turn back to the promise or demand of Elon Musk that there needs to be remigration. The facts are these. From 2000 to 2020, the US population increased by about 50 million people. The white population decreased by 3. The non-white population increased by 53 million people. That is based on the census that the United States is constitutionally required to carry out every 10 years. That means that the whole population growth from 2000 to 2020, in those 20 years, the 50 million population growth was because of the growth of the non-white population. And against that background, if you worry about the South African scenario, if you say to prevent South Africa you need remigration, we should realize what is clear in the US and in Europe. Remigration is not lawful deportations of people who are in the country, have no right to stay, have been rejected asylum seekers, and can lawfully be deported. Look at lawful deportations under Presidents Obama and the first term of President Trump. President Obama deported around 3 million people. Donald Trump, in his first term, deported around 1.5 million. Now, lawful deportations exist in Germany, in France, in Britain, and in the United States. But remigration is not that. Remigration is the answer to the promise Donald Trump made in his election campaign to carry out the largest deportation in American history. Now, people might have shrugged then. What does he mean? He wasn't able to deport more than 1.5 million people. It is hard to do. What is he going to do differently this time? Well, his people were asked. Here, Charlie Kirk, the late Charlie Kirk, asked Stephen Miller, who is today in the White House the key architect of that policy, in 2024, a very simple question. How do we deport 30 million people? Steve Miller said, well, what he didn't say is, we will not deport 30 million people. What he did say is, in order to carry out a deportation operation of that scale, you would need to involve the US military. It would be an undertaking to build all the detention centers that would be greater than any national infrastructure project we've done to date. So the biggest deportation in American history would require the military in American cities and the biggest infrastructure project in recent decades. Now, the US has deported people before, mass deportations in the 30s, in the 50s. Here is an article in Politico from 2024. And it describes the 1930s deportations that Steve Miller and Donald Trump have looked back to, as well as the deportations in the 1950s under President Eisenhower. But in the 30s, what happened? There were raids by law enforcement in all the major cities in California, but also Chicago. By the 1930s, 1 million Mexicans were returned to Mexico. only 80,000 were formally deported. The goal was to stoke fear, create fear through raids in major cities, to pressure Mexicans to leave by themselves. Newspapers ran inflated numbers of lawful deportations to create a sense that you were doomed, you couldn't hide. The result was large-scale self-deportation. Actually, 1/3 of the Chicano, the American Hispanic population in Los Angeles disappeared in 1935, by 1935. And 60%, the estimate was, of those who left in the 30s were American citizens. Now this has been studied by Miller and others, and it's now being applied. You create fear. You create a detention center network everywhere in the country. And what you hope is that by attacking citizens and non-citizens, you make them leave by themselves for fear of being treated in the way we have seen in recent days and weeks throughout the United States, from Portland to Minnesota. The US Department of Homeland Security is publishing fake figures. The 600,000 deportations. There is no basis, in fact, to this. Actually, the real statistics that were published under Joe Biden on deportations are no longer published. But as you can see in our analysis on our website, we know that this is not true. Instead, we have tweets like this one. And here I come back to the promise of 100 million deportations. It's the Department of Homeland Security. It shows us an idyllic scene. Palm trees, a beautiful, peaceful place with a car decades old. And a message. The peace of a nation, America, is no longer besieged by the third world. Now, that is not referring to irregular or illegal migrants. That is referring to people with a background outside of the United States or the West. But 100 million deportations leads us to a diabolical mathematical realization. Let's go back to the tweet Elon Musk retweeted on the 28th of December last year, where he talked about the drop in America's white population from 83% in 1975 to 59% in 2025, on the way to be less than 50%, which means less, no longer the absolute majority in the country. If 100 million people are deported in the next 10 years by the Department of Homeland Security and the military in the biggest deportation in American history, then the American population, and you see the calculation here, would be reduced, let's say, by 100 million. If those are, as is obviously the intention, the non-white population, this non-white population would decrease from 140 to 40 million people. And that would mean, and here is what comes out in this diabolical mathematical equation, that would mean that by 2035, the percentage of the white population in America is back to the 1970s. So the picture of a past, idyllic, peaceful country not besieged by the third world and the message of 100 million deportations shows us what is the underlying objective of the White House's policy. This isn't about removing irregular migrants, of whom there are only 14 million in the largest estimates made by experts. This is about deporting US citizens. 80 million US citizens of a different ethnic background to return to a state of the 1970s where the non-white population is reduced to less than 20%. It is going back to the 70s through methods that are criminal and completely illegal in terms of the US protection of citizens and their right to stay in the country. But hey, this is what we've been told during the election campaign, that America would carry out a second American Revolution. Revolutions are bloody affairs. As the head of the Heritage Foundation told us, we are in the process of the second American Revolution, It will remain bloodless if the left allows it to be. Which means if there's no resistance. If there is resistance, the implication is that blood will flow. And here is the craziness about this ideology, this project that is now being implemented. Look at Texas. Texas is priding itself on being a global, I quote from the website of the government, of one of these 50 US states, Texas, a global economic force, one of the strongest and most diverse economies in the nation. Actually, Texas is the second strongest economy as a state among the 50 states. It has also been governed by Republican governors since the mid-1990s. And since 2004, the non-white population of Texas is no longer the majority. Actually, if you look at this, a few years ago, the white population came second to the Latino population with 40% of the share of the population of Texas. So the second most strongest economy in the United States is one where already more than 20 years ago that happened, which Trump and Musk and the Department of Homeland Security will now try to reverse for the country as a whole through mass deportation, including of citizens. Or, of course, California, which is the most important and strongest economy among the 50 states. It would be among the top 10 economies in the world on its own. California has not had a white majority population since 2000, for 25 years. The three richest states in America are California, Texas, and New York, where the city of New York has, since the 1st of January this year, the first Muslim mayor of New York in its history. So the argument by Musk and Trump and others that you can't be a thriving economy, a diverse, innovative society, if the white population is no longer the majority, is disproven in the United States itself. But ideologues filled with hate and inspired by the apartheid regimes in Rhodesia and South Africa that have also been praised of these regimes, been retweeted by Elon Musk in recent days. People who believe that race and racial dominance and the struggle and fight between races is the key to history, racists, will not be deterred by the simple argument that California and Texas and New York City have been among the most dynamic and successful and diverse societies in history. And now let me get to Europe. Because the crazy thing is that the same White House now tries to export this ideology to Europe. That is why Elon Musk is concerned about the non-white population of the United Kingdom, Canada and Western Europe. And recently, in December last year, they are telling us everything that they intend to do. J.D. Vance, the vice president, in an interview explained that Islamist adjacent views, views inspired by Islamism, might rise to power in a European nuclear power, Paris or London, in 15 years. So here's the theory. Obviously, the non-white population of the United Kingdom is about the level of what it was in the United States in the 1970s, 17%. But here the story is, it's Muslims that will be the majority. And if Muslims are the majority in the next 15 years, which is totally impossible given the demography of the United Kingdom, then, J.D. Vance says, very destructive moral ideas in countries with nuclear weapons will fall into the hands of people who can cause, you see the quote, very serious harm to the US. So he says that the United States needs to change the demographic development in Western Europe, including the United Kingdom and France, because otherwise it will be threatened by nuclear powers in Europe. And now we understand what is written in the US National Security Strategy that was published with a lot of interest and a lot of bewilderment in Europe at the end of last year, where it says that it is more than plausible that within a few decades certain NATO members will become majority non-European, and that will mean that they will view the alliance with the United States differently, which means they can no longer be reliable allies. Now, crazy ideas like this are easily dismissed until it is too late. People dismissed Mussolini, who kept dreaming of a Roman Empire. And then Mussolini, of course, sent his troops to Albania, to Greece. He had sent them to East Africa and to North Africa. And in the end, Italy, after more than 2 decades of his dictatorship, stumbled into a civil war. Or Franco, the Spanish dictator, who led an army from North Africa back to Spain at the beginning of the Spanish Civil War, who was convinced, as Paul Preston has described in his book Architects of Terror, that there was a conspiracy in Spain of Bolsheviks, Jews and Freemasons, and that in order to stop this conspiracy, any cruelty, repression and any brutality in the Civil War and after was justified. And finally, in my lifetime, in our lifetime, Slobodan Milosevic in Serbia, a former communist apparatchik who was convinced that you could create a greater Serbia, who promised this to his people by expelling the non-Serb population. The ethnic cleansing that we've seen in the bits of Croatia that troops supported by Milosevic took over in 1991 and in Bosnia from 92 to 95. When we look at this again, a tweet by one of the most important ministries of the Trump administration, the Department of Homeland Security, whose resources have been dramatically increased in the last year, and its promise of America carrying out 100 million deportations. What we see is a promise as crazy, as inhumane, as brutal and as dangerous as the ideologies of Mussolini, Franco and Milosevic. The identitarian idea of remigration and ethnic cleansing is now a guiding philosophy of the government that sits in the White House and of a president that has looked to some of the worst inspirations in 20th century world history. Let's take it seriously. So let me end with a quote I've used before, but which is extremely relevant to this discussion. It is from a play by the Swiss writer Max Frisch, Biedermann und die Brandstifter, Biedermann and the Arsonists. And it comes from the 2 people who were invited into the house naively and who then bring up everything that they need to burn down the house, which in the end they do. They don't hide their intention. And one of them says, the best and safest disguise is still the plain and naked truth. Nobody believes that. If we don't believe that this administration in the White House is radical, revolutionary and dangerous, after what they've been telling us in the last 2 weeks, then we are acting like the naive landowner who's let in the arsonists and who refuses to open his eyes and to listen to what he hears. This is serious and we better take it seriously. Thank you.